You've tuned in to the unavailing frequency. But don't touch that dial. We've got you right where we want you.
I bought the Civic on a Tuesday in October, which should have been my first sign that something was wrong. Nobody makes good decisions on Tuesdays in October. The sky is that specific shade of gray that isn't dramatic enough to be beautiful and isn't clear enough to be pleasant. Just gray. The color of a headache. The color of waiting rooms. I remember standing in the gravel lot of Kalowski's pre-owned auto on Route 9 with my hands shoved into the front pockets of my hoodie, looking at this car and thinking, it'll do. It'll do. The 2.5 most dangerous words in the English language. The car was a 2009 Honda Civic, silver, or maybe it had been silver once. It was now the color of something that aspired to be silver and gave up halfway. There was a small dent above the rear left wheel well, a crack in the side mirror housing that someone had wrapped in electrical tape, and the passenger seat had a stain the shape of Florida on it that the previous owner had clearly attempted to scrub out and succeeded only in spreading. The odometer read 114,000 miles. The Carfax report was clean. The price was $4,200, which was $800 less than I had budgeted, which felt like the universe telling me to do it. I know now that the universe wasn't telling me anything. The universe is not in the business of communication. If anything, the universe is in the business of setting traps and then watching, bored and indifferent, while things fall into them. My name is Ainsley Carter. I am, or was, depending on when you're reading this, 26 years old, a junior accounts coordinator at a marketing firm in Hartford, Connecticut, person who ate the same lunch 4 days out of 5, turkey wrap, salt and vinegar chips, black coffee. Person whose most dramatic quality was that she owned way too many candles and occasionally forgot to call her mother back. I was, by every measure I'd ever applied to myself, unremarkable. I had a studio apartment with a Murphy bed I'd bought from a Facebook marketplace listing. Had a cat named Ptolemy who was indifferent to me. I had a college degree I'd used exactly once to hang on the wall of my childhood bedroom before my parents converted it into a workout room. I had until at least that Tuesday in October no car. I'd taken the bus for 3 years. The bus was fine. The bus was reliable in the way that things are reliable when you've lowered your expectations to the floor. It came eventually. It took you roughly to where you wanted to go. It smelled like old coffee and human disappointment. But I'd gotten a promotion in September, which came with a modest raise and a new office in West Hartford. And the bus route to West Hartford from my apartment required 2 transfers and a 15-minute walk that became genuinely miserable in February, so a car. Phil Kalowski was a heavy-set man in his late 50s who wore a down vest over a flannel shirt and shook my hand with the specific confidence of a man who had never in his life doubted that he was the most trustworthy person in any given room. He had a salt and pepper mustache and reading glasses on a beaded cord around his neck, and he said, "Yep," a lot. In the way that some people use not as an agreement, but as a kind of auditory filler, a placeholder sound while the real part of his brain was doing something else. "Yep, she's a good car," he said, patting the Civic's roof in a way that was probably meant to be affectionate. "Previous owner was a retired school teacher over in Simsbury. Kept it garaged in winter, very clean, great driving record." "So what's wrong with it? What's the catch?" I asked. He looked at me with what I think was genuine respect. "Well, the AC compressor's a little sluggish when it first starts up in summer. You'll know because it makes a sound like a cat that doesn't want to be picked up. Just let it run for a couple minutes before you crank it. Other than that," he spread his hands in the universal gesture of nothing else to see here. "And the GPS?" He'd mentioned it in a listing as a selling point. Built-in navigation system, rare for that model year. I didn't especially need a GPS, I had a phone. but it was sort of the thing that felt like a bonus, the scratch ticket you didn't expect to win. Phil Kalowski's expression did something complicated. Not bad exactly, more like the expression of a man deciding quickly how much of a true answer to give. Well, you see, it's one of those factory-installed units, he said. Built into the dash. Maps are a bit outdated. It's running on, I want to say, about 2014 maps, so you might find it doesn't know about newer roads. But for getting around the state, for your regular routes, it works just fine. Works great, even. But the maps are 12 years old. 11 years old, he said, as though the distinction mattered. And yep, you'd want to use your phone for anything new, but it boots up fast, the interface is clean, the voice on it is, I don't know, I find it kind of soothing. He paused. My wife says it sounds like someone reading a eulogy, but I think that's a matter of taste. I bought the car. I sat in the driver's seat and adjusted the mirrors and confirmed that the radio worked, that the heat came on, that the wipers moved in smooth arcs across the windshield. And I wrote Phil Kalowski a check, and he handed me the keys and the title and a folder of maintenance records. And I drove the Civic off the lot, feeling the specific sensation of someone who's done something adult and correct and earned the right to feel slightly smug about it. The GPS was on the dashboard, a rectangular screen about the size of a hardback novel, and set into the center console in a way that must have seemed futuristic in 2009, and now it looked like an artifact from some alternate timeline where touchscreens had gone a little bit differently. The screen had a slightly yellowish cast like old newsprint. When I turned the car on, it powered up with a quiet chime. 3 ascending tones, almost musical, and it displayed a loading screen, a blue globe slowly rotating with the words Navigon 7100 in white sans serif text beneath it. Then it resolved into a map. My location was a small blue arrow in the middle of the screen pointing north. Route 9 was a thick gray line. The lot, Kalowski's, was not labeled. The nearest labeled landmark was a CVS that I was fairly certain had closed years ago. The voice that I entered my home address to test it in was female. Low, unhurried, precisely enunciated. Phil Kalowski was right that it sounded like someone reading a eulogy, but he was wrong that this was a matter of taste. It objectively sounded like that. Like a woman who had been asked to convey information clearly and without any emotional coloring, and had done so with such perfect neutrality that the neutrality itself became a kind of tone, a frequency just below the threshold of unsettling. In 400 feet, turn right onto Route 9 North, she said. I turned right onto Route 9 North. Continue for 6.2 miles. I continued. Everything was fine. The car drove smoothly, the heat worked, the radio picked up the NPR station I liked. And by the time I got home and parallel parked, successfully on the first attempt, I might add, I decided that the Civic and I were going to get along just fine. So I named it Nothing, because I'm not the person who names cars. For the first 3 weeks, the GPS was exactly what Phil Kalowski had promised. Functional, reliable for familiar routes, charmingly outdated. I didn't know about the construction on Flatbush Avenue that had been ongoing for 2 years. I thought the Panera on Farmington Avenue was still a different restaurant. The screen labeled it as Baja Fresh, which hadn't existed in that location since around 2011. When I drove past my office building, the map showed an empty lot. But it knew the roads. It knew the highway exits and numbered streets and the general logic of Hartford's grid. And on the 3 occasions I used it for actual navigation, once to a friend's new apartment in Glastonbury, once to a dental appointment in Wethersfield, and once to IKEA in New Haven that I drove alone and regretted, it got me to those places without incident. I mostly used my phone. The GPS was just there, the way the Florida-shaped stain was just there, and I stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing most things that don't demand your attention. The first strange thing happened on a Wednesday, second week of October. Now I want to be careful here because I've gone back over this moment many times and I want to describe it accurately rather than just retrospectively, which is to say I want to describe what I actually noticed in the moment rather than what I now understand it was. In the moment, it didn't seem frightening. It seemed like a small malfunction, the sort of quirk you expect from a 12-year-old piece of consumer electronics. I was driving home from work. It was about 6 p.m., already fully dark. November does that, pulls the plug on daylight at an hour that always feels slightly like an accusation. I was driving on Asylum Avenue, which I took every day, which I knew so well I could have driven it in a sensory deprivation tank. The GPS was on, but not giving directions because I wasn't going anywhere. I hadn't gone 100 times before. The screen, as usual, showed my blue arrow moving along the street. And then the voice said, "In 300 feet, turn left on Laurel Street." I did not turn left on Laurel Street. I didn't have a reason to. My apartment was right on Asylum, another half-mile up. I said out loud, "No thank you," the way you talk to a GPS when it's being wrong, which is to say with a mix of amusement and condescension. I kept driving straight. "Recalculating," the voice said. Well, that was normal. GPSs are supposed to recalculate when you ignore them. I turned the volume down a little. I thought nothing more about it until I was in my apartment, eating reheated pasta. I realized I hadn't entered a destination. The GPS had been in its idle state, showing the map, tracking my location, but it wasn't actively routing me anywhere. It shouldn't have been. I hadn't given it any directions at all. I sat with my fork halfway to my mouth for a moment. Probably just a glitch, I thought. Old software. It got confused. I finished the pasta. I fed Ptolemy, who ate without looking at me. I watched 40 minutes of a TV show I can't remember now, and then I went to bed. I did not think about Laurel Street. The second thing that happened about 10 days later, it's a little bit harder to explain away. I was driving to my friend Dee's apartment in West Hartford on a Saturday afternoon. Deidre technically, though she would look at you with cold contempt if you ever called her that. She'd been my friend since college, a tall, perpetually sardonic woman who worked in hospital administration and coped with the existential weight of that by maintaining an extremely strong opinion about everything, and she had a wine collection organized by country of origin. She'd moved to West Hartford in the summer and had been intermittently annoyed that I hadn't come over more. I knew the way to these. I'd been there twice already since she moved, but the route involved a stretch of unfamiliar side streets near a complex that I always managed to second guess. So I plugged her address into the GPS, into the old Navigon, the fossil, mostly out of laziness. It routed me normally for the first 15 minutes. I merged onto I-84, took the exit, turned onto New Britain Avenue. The voice narrated its measured, funereal way, and I followed along. Then instead of directing me toward D Street, it said, "In 800 feet, take the exit for Flatbush Avenue." I did not take the exit for Flatbush Avenue, so it recalculated, brought me back toward the highway. It tried again to redirect me, but I kept going toward D's. I knew where I was going, I just needed the last two turns and I could figure those out from memory. The GPS kept insisting on Flatbush. The voice didn't get any louder or more insistent. It remained exactly measured and unhurried as always, but it kept coming every 30 seconds or so, a new instruction pulling me in the opposite direction. Turn left on Flatbush Avenue. Turn left on Flatbush Avenue. Turn left on... I turned the volume all the way off. I found D's building from memory, got the last turn wrong but circled the block, arrived 11 minutes late. "You look weird," Dee said, handing me a glass of Côte de Rhone. "I'm fine," I said. "You have a face that you're making when you're trying not to think about something." "Well, I have this GPS that's acting kind of strange." She was interested in it, but in a low-grade way that she was interested in most things, which meant that she asked about 2 or 3 pointing questions, and then she formed a full theory. "Well, old hardware does that," The firmware is probably corrupted, or it's trying to route you around traffic, and the traffic data is from 2014, so it's routing you around the traffic jam that just doesn't exist anymore. She paused. Or it's haunted. Thanks, Dee. I'm not joking, people die in cars all the time. The previous owner's a ghost, she lives in that GPS, she's trying to take you somewhere. She sipped her wine with the sincerity of someone who just said something extremely reasonable. Have you thought about Googling it? I had not Googled it. Google it! So I Googled Navigon 7100, giving wrong directions, and I found a forum thread from 2016 in which a man named DriveSafe_Terry had described a similar issue. The GPS rerouted him to locations he hadn't programmed. Several people had responded with variations of updates and maps, reset to factory settings. The map update had cost about $49 in 2016, but the service was almost certainly discontinued by now. The factory reset option was in the settings menu. I did the factory reset that night when I got home. The GPS rebooted, displayed the blue globe, played the 3 ascending chimes, and showed me the map. Everything was just fine for another week. I want to tell you something about the stretch of road where the third thing happened, because I think geography matters in stories like this. Not in a mystical way, not because I believe certain places are inherently cursed or significant, but because places have texture. They have a feeling. And the texture of a place shapes your perception of what happens in it. Route 44 heading east out of Avon runs through a stretch of Connecticut that has the quality of somewhere that is simultaneously very beautiful, very old, and very empty. But not empty in the way of the Midwest, where emptiness is kind of the point, where the landscape announces itself as negative space, but empty in the way of New England, which is to say the trees come right up to the road, hills roll in close, and the sky is narrow overhead, and you have that persistent sensation that there is something just beyond what you can see that's been there for a very long time and does not especially care whether you or anyone else is there or not. It was a Thursday evening. It was the first week of December. I was driving home from a work event, a holiday party at a coworker's house in Simsbury. Kind of party where you arrive thinking you'll stay an hour and then stay 2.5 because there's always something keeping you from the door. Another conversation, another drink, someone's bringing out cheese that requires a moment of serious appreciation. I left at 8:30, slightly wine warm, running through the calculation of whether I was okay to drive. I was. Only 2 glasses over 3 hours. I had some food. Looking forward to the particular comfort of the old, cold car heating up. I put Dee's address into the GPS by accident. I've been texting her about the party and her address was the first in the recent destinations list. My thumb hit it without thinking. I caught the error before I'd pulled out of my coworker's driveway and I went into the menu to change it. But the Navigon's menu navigation is a specific kind of hell. Nested screens, tiny buttons, a touchscreen that sometimes registers your press, sometimes decides it has better things to do. And after 30 seconds of jabbing at it, I just gave up, decided to ignore it, and drive home from memory. I knew the route. Simsbury to Hartford is simple. Get on Route 44, take that east, run into 218, pick up I-84, 40 minutes flat, no big deal. The Navigon started directing me correctly. Down the residential street, right turn, Route 44 east. I wasn't following. I was just letting it talk while I drove and thought about the party and the cheese and the conversation I'd had with a senior colleague about a project that might get reassigned. In 1 mile, take the exit for Route 10 South, the voice said. Route 10 South was not toward Dee's apartment. Route 10 South was away from Hartford, away from Dee, away from anywhere I wanted to go. I ignored it. In 1/2 mile, take the exit for Route 10 South. I stayed in the center lane. Take the exit for Route 10 South. I drove past the exit, recalculating. And then the screen changed. I didn't see it immediately because I was watching the road, but something in my peripheral vision flagged it. A shift in the quality of the light from the center console. A change in color temperature. The GPS's usual blue and gray map display had been replaced by something else. A gray, grainy, low contrast image. A video. I did not reach over to look at it directly for another 40 seconds because I was driving, and because some part of me, some part that already knew, that had already processed what the peripheral vision had delivered, was not ready to look directly. I kept both hands on the wheel. I watched the road. I breathed in deeply. Then I glanced at the video. It was me. It was me sitting in the driver's seat of the Civic, shot from somewhere above and slightly behind me, not from behind the head seat, from the headrest, not from the ceiling, from somewhere that shouldn't have been possible in the interior of a car. The angle was maybe 30 degrees above the horizon, looking down at the driver's side. The image was gray and grainy the way security camera footage is gray and grainy, with the characteristic compression artifact quality, the slight blockiness in darker areas. And I could see my own hands on the steering wheel. I could see the side of my own face in profile, lit by headlights from oncoming traffic. I watched myself drive. The image was live. I could tell because when I turned my head to look at the screen, I watched on the screen my own head turn. I watched my own eyes widen. I looked back at the road, back to the screen. I watched my own head turn back to the road again. I said out loud to no one, "What?" The voice said with perfect composure, "Recalculating. In 800 feet, turn right on Simsbury Road, then turn right on Route 10 South." I did not turn. I kept going on Route 44, headed east. My hands were gripping the steering wheel too hard. I could feel the effort in my forearms, the specific ache of overcorrection. And I was telling myself very firmly and very quietly in the inside of my own head that this was a glitch. Old screens sometimes display garbage data. There were cameras built in the newer cars for safety systems. But this was a 2009 Civic. There was no camera. There was no camera. There was not a camera because the technology wasn't in this car. Turn right on Simsbury Road. I did not turn right on Simsbury Road. Yet the image on the screen persisted. I watched myself not turn. I watched my own profile from an impossible angle as Route 44 went past, and it had the extremely specific and horrible sensation of being watched by something that was using my own face to watch me. 3 minutes later, when I was firmly on I-84 heading east toward Hartford, and the GPS had run out of alternative routes to try, the screen went back to the map. The blue arrow moved east steadily toward home. The voice said nothing. I said nothing. I drove. The thing about a terrifying experience in a car is that the car keeps on moving. This sounds obvious, but it has a particular psychological quality that differentiates it from being terrified in a stationary place. When you're frightened in your apartment, you can stop. You can stand very still and let the fear happen to you and just wait for it to end. When you're frightened in a car on the highway, you gotta keep driving. You have to signal, you have to check mirrors, you have to maintain your speed, stay in your lane. And so the fear has to happen to you while you continue to perform complex physical and cognitive tasks, which means it's happening in a compartment, in a box you've hastily constructed, and you're managing it rather than experiencing it, and it makes it feel both less and more real all at the same time. I got home, I parked. I sat in the Civic in my parking spot with the engine off for approximately 7 minutes. I know it was 7 minutes because I watched the clock on the dashboard move from 9:14 to 9:21. The GPS screen was dark. I went over everything I knew very carefully, like I was filing something away. 1. The Navigon had tried to route me off of Route 44 and onto Route 10 South. 2. When I refused, the screen had displayed a live video feed of me from an angle that required a camera positioned in an impossible location. 3. When I got on I-84 and was definitely not going where the GPS wanted me to go, The video had ended and the map had returned. I could find an explanation for some of that. Old software has bugs, old screens have display glitches, old firmware, corrupted storage, a dozen technical explanations exist for a screen doing something unexpected. But what I could not find an explanation for, what I just couldn't make fit, was the fact that the image had been live. I had watched my own head turn in real time. I'd watched my own face react to what I was seeing. There had been footage of me from inside my car from an angle that did not correspond to any camera that existed. I turned the GPS on. The blue globe, 3 chimes, the map. The map showed my blue arrow in the parking lot. Surrounding streets were labeled. The CVS that had closed years ago was still labeled a CVS. The GPS had no way of contacting anyone. It was a 2009 standalone unit with no cellular connection, no Wi-Fi capability. It received GPS satellite signal to locate itself. It could not transmit. It could not, in theory, receive a video feed from an external source. In theory. I took my phone out from my bag and opened Google Maps. I typed in the intersection of Simsbury Road and Route 10. Google Maps showed me a 2-lane road heading south through Simsbury into Canton. There was nothing remarkable about it. I typed in Route 10 South, Simsbury, Connecticut, unusual news. I got results about road construction, a town council meeting about traffic signals, a piece from the Hartford Courant about a new development going in the near Canton border. Nothing really. I typed in Simsbury Road, Route 10 South, incident. Nothing. I put my phone in my pocket and went inside. Ptolemy was sitting on the Murphy bed with the expression he always wore, which was the expression of a cat who had made peace with the fact that his living situation was not ideal and he was enduring it with dignity. I sat next to him. He allowed this. "Something is wrong with the car," I said. Ptolemy blinked. "I'm going to sell it," I said. Ptolemy blinked again. We both understood that I wasn't going to sell it, that I had a car loan now, even though it was a small one, that I needed the car for work, and also that some other part of me, the part I hadn't yet admitted to myself, was already asking questions that I wouldn't be able to stop asking. And selling the car wouldn't be the answer. I googled Navigon 7100 display glitch video feed. I got a Reddit thread from 2015. The title was, "My car's GPS showed me a picture of the road ahead. Is this a feature?" The responses explained that some GPS units had a front camera integration mode for use with aftermarket dash cams. If the firmware detected a connected camera, it would display the feed. The Navigon 7100 apparently did have this capability. I had no dash cam. I had not installed a dash cam. I clicked deeper into the thread. Someone had replied to the original post with a follow-up question. Did it show you the road ahead or was it looking back at you? The original poster had replied, "Road ahead, why?" The reply back, "No reason." The account that had posted the reply was deleted. I put my phone face down on the bed. I lay on my back and looked at the ceiling and thought very carefully about Route 10 South and what was on Route 10 South and why an 11-year-old GPS with corrupted firmware might have wanted me to go there. I called my mother the next morning, not because I was going to tell her what had happened. I wasn't. My mother responds to unusual information by immediately finding the worst possible interpretation and then constructing a detailed emotional architecture around it. But because talking to my mother in the morning, it's that specific kind of mundane thing that I needed to do. She talked for 25 minutes about her book club, the new neighbor's dog, a recipe she'd found for a winter squash soup, and whether my brother was going to come home for Christmas. And I just sat there and said, in all the right places. And by the end of the call, I felt substantially more like a normal person who was living a normal life. Then I got in the car and drove to work. The GPS started up, the globe, the chimes, the map. I watched it boot because I was watching it now in a way I hadn't been before. The loading screen looked the same, the map looked the same. My blue arrow was in the parking lot pointing south. I drove to work. The GPS was quiet. I hadn't entered a destination. I took the route I always took. The blue arrow moved along the familiar streets and nothing happened. I told myself, in the sensible light of a winter morning, I'd seen a glitch. Stressed eyes see things. I'd had 2 glasses of wine and driven 40 minutes in a cold night, seen something on the screen in peripheral vision, and my brain, which is built into pattern recognition, sometimes it runs a little too hot, and it had assembled it into something more coherent and more alarming than what was actually there. I believed that for approximately 4 days. On the 4th day, something happened again. This time I was in broad daylight, stone cold sober, 10:15 on a Sunday morning, driving from my apartment to the grocery store. I hadn't entered a destination. The grocery store was 4 blocks away. I pulled out of my parking spot going north on Asylum when the GPS said, "In 200 feet, turn left on Laurel Street." Laurel Street again. I noticed the hitch in my breathing. I noticed my hands tightening. I kept going north. Recalculating. I turned into the grocery store parking lot, parked, turned off the car, sat there. The screen was black. The GPS had turned off with the engine. I went and brought groceries. I came back. I put them in the trunk, got in the driver's seat, and before starting the engine, I sat there and looked at the GPS, and I said out loud in my most level voice, "What is on Laurel Street?" Silence. The screen was dark. I started the engine, the GPS booted. I didn't go home. I typed in the address manually. Laurel Street. Without a number, just a street name. The GPS didn't know what to do with this. It wanted a house number, and after a moment it displayed a list of partial matches, and I selected Laurel Street, Hartford, and it plotted a route. In 400 feet, turn left on Asylum Avenue. I turned left on Asylum. It took me to Laurel Street in 4 minutes. Laurel Street was a residential road 2 blocks long, lined with older multifamily houses, the kind of densely settled Hartford street where every house has a different window style, and a small porch and a chain link fence around a yard that's more ambitious than grass. Trees that had lost their leaves, their branches making the specific winter pattern against the sky that looked like cracked glass. 2 cars parked on the right side, no people. I drove down it slowly. I was not sure what I was looking for. I was not sure if I was looking for anything. Maybe I just wanted to see it was ordinary. There was nothing there. That the GPS had been trying to route me to a street in Hartford the way GPSs sometimes do when their data is corrupted and they're pattern matching against an address that no longer makes sense. There was a house on the left side toward the end of the block. Had a fire truck in front of it. Not a truck with lights and sirens. A truck that had been there long enough to have turned off its lights. There were 2 firefighters in the front yard talking to a woman in a coat. And there was a char mark above one of the second-story windows. The specific black lick of smoke damage where a fire has pushed through glass. I didn't stop. I drove to the end of the block, turned right, and went home. I put my groceries away, sat down at my kitchen table. Ptolemy jumped up and sat next to me. There had been a fire on Laurel Street, a small one. The house was still standing. The firefighters were calm. The woman was talking rather than crying, but a fire. The GPS had been trying to take me to a fire. I sat with that for a while. The easy explanation was coincidence. Laurel Street was 2 miles long, hundreds of homes on it. Fires happen. There's no reason to connect the GPS's direction with the specific event occurring there, except the GPS had tried to take me to Laurel Street twice. 3 weeks ago and this morning. And then this morning when I arrived there was a fire. The other easy explanation was that I was contriving a narrative, that I was a person who had experienced a frightening thing on a dark road at night, and whose brain was now performing the very human operation of finding patterns, connecting dots that had no business being connected, building meaning out of coincidence the way people always do, the way we're all built to do. I opened my laptop. I searched House Fire, Laurel Street, Hartford, December 2024. There was a local news item. Small fire, second floor of a multifamily home, started by an unattended candle. No injuries. Fire department responded at 9:43 a.m. I'd left my apartment at 10:05. The GPS had told me to turn left on Laurel Street before I'd passed the intersection. The fire had already been happening. I thought about Route 10 South, the route the GPS had tried to get me onto 2 weeks ago on the dark stretch of Route 44. I opened a new browser tab and searched. Route 10, South Simsbury, Canton, Connecticut. Incident news, November, December 2024. The third result was from the Simsbury Patch, dated the evening of the night I had been on Route 44. The headline was Multi-Vehicle Accident Closes Southbound Route 10 near Canton Line. A 3-car accident had occurred at 8:52 p.m. I'd been on Route 44 at approximately 8:45. Route 10 South from Simsbury Road intersection would have taken me directly to that accident. The GPS had been trying to take me to the accident. I closed my laptop. I sat in my kitchen for a long time. Ptolemy sat next to me and for once looked at me directly with his round orange eyes, and I had the absurd thought, he knew something. He always knows something, and if I could explain it to him what was happening, he would nod and say, yes, obviously, I've been waiting for you to figure this out. Okay, I said out loud to the cat, to the kitchen, to whatever was listening. Okay, the GPS takes me to places where things are happening, to anomalies, to incidents. I paused. Why? Ptolemy blinked. And the camera. What is the deal with the camera? I knew what the camera meant. I'd known since the night on Route 44, known in the way you know things you don't want to know, known in the layer below the layer where you keep your reasonable explanations. The camera was a message. Follow the route, the camera said. Go where I'm sending you. And if you don't, if you choose your own path over mine, then I want you to know that I can see you. I'm watching you from somewhere you cannot locate, from an angle that should not exist, and I want you to understand that watching has always been happening, that it was happening before you bought the car, and it will continue whether you comply or not. The camera was not surveillance. The camera was a threat. I picked up my phone. I almost called Dee. I put the phone back down. Dee would apply her hospital administrator brain to this, which was a brain that dealt in facts and protocols and established procedures, and what I was dealing with was none of those things. Dee would fit the most efficient path to a reasonable explanation, and she would follow it completely, and she would miss the part that was not reasonable. I thought about calling my mother. I thought about that for about 3 seconds, and I dismissed it. I thought about posting something online, a Reddit forum. My GPS is sending me to accidents and fires, and here's what I know. Has anyone else experienced this? But I thought about the deleted account in the 2015 thread, the one that had asked, was it looking back at you, and then vanished. Felt something cold move through me. That was not quite fear, not quite certainty, and was, I think, a specific emotional register of understanding that something is more serious than you've been treating it. I got up. I put on my coat and I went down to the parking lot. The Civic was in its spot, silver going gray in the winter, and the afternoon light. The cracked mirror housing with its electrical tape, the dent above the rear wheel well. I opened the driver's door and leaned in and looked at the GPS. The screen was off. It was dark. I looked at it for a long time. I looked at the case, the seams, the bezel around the screen. I looked at the top of the unit where it met the dash. I got my phone out, turned on the flashlight, and looked at every edge and corner. I was looking for a camera lens, but I didn't find one. That's the thing I've learned about looking for things you're afraid to find. Not finding them is not the same as them not being there. I got back out of the car. I stood in the parking lot in the December cold, and I looked at the Civic and I said very quietly to the car or the GPS or whatever is in one of both of them, "Okay, I'm listening." Behind me, a bus went past on Asylum Avenue. A door somewhere in the building above me opened and closed. The bare trees at the edge of the parking lot moved in a small wind. I didn't know then what I was listening to. I didn't know what the GPS was or what it wanted, who had built it or programmed it, or whether the word programmed even made sense for whatever this was. I didn't know what the anomalies meant, or what I was supposed to do when I got to them, or why me, why this car, why now? But I found out. Eventually, I found out most of it. I wish with a clarity that is not diminished in the months since that I hadn't.